Somewhere south of Tehran, under a mountain the Iranian regime spent 15 years and billions of dollars hollowing out, there was a room the outside world was never supposed to see, buried nearly half a mile of solid rock overhead, reinforced concrete walls, its own air defense ring, built specifically so that no bomb on Earth could reach it. And on the night of June 21st into June 22nd, 2025, that mountain got opened up anyway. Stay with me for the next several minutes, because what actually happened inside that mountain, what Iran fired back in response, and what may still be sitting inside that rock right now, is one of the most disputed, most consequential military stories of this decade, and almost none of it is as simple as the headlines made it sound. Let's start with what this mountain actually is, because the name alone tells you how seriously Iran treated it. It's called Fordo, and according to Newsweek's reporting, it sits buried beneath a mountain near the city of Qom, dug roughly half a mile underground, lined with reinforced concrete, and ringed with its own air defenses. It was built from the ground up to survive a direct air strike and keep functioning afterward. Behnam Ben Talablu, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, told the Financial Times, and this is a direct quote, "Fordo is the be-all and end-all of Iran's nuclear operation." According to estimates from the Institute for Science and International Security, that single facility, tucked into the hills outside Qom, had the theoretical capacity to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for 9 nuclear bombs in about 3 weeks. 9 bombs, 3 weeks. That is the number that had Washington and Jerusalem awake at night. Here's what makes Fordo different from a normal enrichment site. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the facility's enrichment halls run 6 cascades of older IR-1 centrifuges alongside 10 cascades of far more advanced IR-6 centrifuges, and under the original 2015 nuclear agreement, Iran was explicitly barred from enriching anything at Fordo at all. That restriction held until the United States withdrew from that agreement in 2018. After that, Iran quietly resumed enrichment inside the mountain, and the material coming out of those centrifuges was reportedly reaching 60% purity, a level that has no real civilian energy justification, and sits just a technical step away from weapons grade. So how do you even begin to hit a target like that? Because I want to be clear here, this wasn't some site nobody had thought about. According to the U.S. Army's own reporting, the origins of the strike plan trace back to 2009, when a Defense Threat Reduction Agency officer was reportedly brought into a classified vault at an undisclosed location and briefed on something happening inside Iran. 15 years? That's how long American planners studied this exact mountain before a single bomb ever left an aircraft. Quick pause, because I want you to sit with that number for a second. 15 years before we go any further into what actually happened that night. If a target takes a decade and a half to prepare for, you already know it isn't a normal military objective. So let's set the stage. The broader war didn't start with the United States. According to Global Security's reporting, the escalation began on June 13, 2025, when Israeli forces conducted a surprise strike campaign against Iranian nuclear infrastructure, hitting significant portions of the Natanz centrifuge hall along with its power supply and support buildings. In the days that followed, the International Atomic Energy Agency assessed Iran had already accumulated enough enriched uranium for roughly 9 weapons, and Iranian officials went public with plans to build a 3rd enrichment site. That's the pressure cooker Washington was watching build for over a week straight. Then came the deception. According to reporting from the Defense Security Monitor, President Trump had publicly stated, less than 48 hours before the strike, that he needed, quote, 2 more weeks to consider whether to use military force. That statement itself turned out to be part of the plan, because on the night of June 21st, 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers lifted off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, and according to the Army's official reporting, some of those bombers initially flew west, out over the Pacific, apparently toward Guam, as a deliberate diversion, while the actual strike package quietly moved in the opposite direction. More than 125 aircraft were involved in total, according to the Congressional Research Service, including 4th and 5th generation fighters, aerial refueling tankers, and a guided missile submarine positioned in the region. One of the 7 B-2s reportedly experienced a mechanical malfunction along the way and had to divert for an emergency landing in Hawaii, according to reporting compiling the operation's official record, codenamed Operation Midnight Hammer. Here's the moment that mattered most. According to Warrior Maven's reporting, citing General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the lead B-2 dropped the first 2 GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrators on the initial aim point at Fordo, and the remaining bombers followed with their own weapons across several additional aim points. By the time it was over, 14 of those 30,000-pound bombs had been dropped, according to CSIS's reporting, 12 of them on Fordo specifically, and 2 more on Natanz. That was the first time in history the GBU-57 had ever been used in actual combat. It had been sitting in the American arsenal since the 2000s, designed for exactly this kind of target, and it had never once been dropped on anything until that night. A U.S. submarine operating in the region simultaneously launched more than 24 Tomahawk cruise missiles at a third nuclear site, Isfahan, according to the Defense Security Monitor. The entire strike package, all 75 precision-guided weapons across 3 separate sites, was delivered in a window of roughly 25 minutes, according to the Congressional Research Service's timeline reconstruction. Now here's why Fordo specifically was the hardest target of the 3. And honestly, the part of this story most people never think about. According to JNS reporting, Fordo's enrichment halls sit buried somewhere between 80 and 90 meters below the summit of the mountain above them. That's close to 300 feet of solid rock and reinforced structure standing between the surface and the actual centrifuge halls. The GBU-57 doesn't work like a normal bomb detonating on contact. It's designed to punch through that layered rock and concrete before it goes off, timing its detonation to occur deep inside the target rather than at the surface. According to the Army's own account, the strike was specifically aimed at the facility's ventilation infrastructure. The idea being that if you can collapse the shafts that let air and equipment move in and out of the mountain, you cripple the facility's ability to function even if the enrichment halls themselves technically survive underneath all that rock. Immediately after the strikes, President Trump addressed the nation. According to CSIS's direct citation of his statement, issued at 10 p.m., that same night he called the operation, quote, a spectacular military success, and stated that, quote, Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Chief Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell backed that characterization in a written statement, telling reporters, and I'm quoting this directly because the language is worth hearing in full, Operation Midnight Hammer was a significant blow to Iran's nuclear capabilities, thanks to the decisive action of President Trump and the bravery of every man and woman in uniform who supported this mission. White House spokeswoman Anna Kelly added that, quote, America and the world are safer thanks to his decisive action. Now, let's pause here, because Iran did not sit quietly after that. If you think a strike this size just goes unanswered, stay with me, because what happened 48 hours later almost tipped this entire war into something much bigger. According to the War Zone's reporting on June 23, 2025, Iran launched a ballistic missile barrage at Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest American military installation in the Middle East, and the nerve center that had directed air campaigns going back to Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan and Operation Iraqi Freedom in Iraq, according to Air and Space Forces magazine. Iran called its retaliation Operation Herald a victory. According to Wikipedia's documented account of the strike, Iran's own figures claimed 14 missiles were fired, one for every GBU-57 dropped on its nuclear sites, while Qatar's official account put the number at 13 intercepted and 1 impact. Iran's Revolutionary Guards issued a statement framing the attack explicitly around that symbolism, 1 missile for every American bomb, calling it retaliation for what they described as military aggression against a, quote, peaceful nuclear program. Here's the detail that took weeks to fully surface. According to Task and Purpose, citing a later Pentagon confirmation, one of those Iranian missiles actually got through the Patriot missile defense shield, protecting Al Udeid, and struck a communication site on the base. And this was the first time the Department of Defense formally acknowledged any damage at the base from that attack. The aviationist backed this up with satellite imagery analysis, showing a radome, essentially a protective dome housing a satellite communications dish, completely destroyed with the antenna inside heavily damaged. No American or Qatari casualties were reported, and according to Ynet's reporting, that was reportedly by design. Iran gave advance warning of the strike hours ahead of time, and according to the New York Times reporting cited in that same coverage, Tehran deliberately structured the attack to minimize casualties and avoid triggering a far larger escalation. Qatar evacuated the base ahead of time based on that warning. Qatar's government, however, was furious regardless, filing an official complaint with the United Nations Security Council and calling the strike, quote, a blatant violation of the country's sovereignty and airspace, according to Al-Istiqlal's reporting, and summoning Iran's ambassador in Doha to formally protest. That exchange, the strike on Fordo followed by the retaliatory strike on Al Udeid, effectively became the ceasefire point that ended what's now referred to as the 12-day war, according to Wikipedia's documented timeline of the Al Udeid strikes. All right, so that's the full sequence. Mountain gets hit, Iran hits back once, and then everyone stood down. Simple story, right? Except it isn't, because here's where the official version of events started to fall apart under its own weight, and I think you deserve the complete picture rather than just the press conference version. According to NBC News reporting, a subsequent U.S. intelligence assessment reportedly found that the strike had not actually collapsed the underground structures at Fordo, and that Iran may have moved a substantial portion of its highly enriched uranium stockpile out of the facility before the bombs ever landed. If that assessment held up, it would mean the operation only set Iran's nuclear timeline back by a matter of months, rather than the years the administration was initially claiming. The White House response to that leaked assessment was immediate and forceful. Sean Parnell characterized it as, quote, flat out wrong, and doubled down publicly, insisting Iran's facilities at Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz were, quote, completely and totally obliterated, adding, there's no doubt about that. But here's the part that I think matters most, and it's the detail that tends to get buried. According to Task, and Purpose's later reporting, the military itself eventually walked back the original obliterated language. Sean Parnell, the same spokesman who had defended the total destruction claim so aggressively, later told reporters that intelligence reports actually suggested Operation Midnight Hammer had, quote, degraded Iran's nuclear program by, quote, 1 to 2 years. 1 to 2 years is a real, meaningful setback. It is not the same thing as total obliteration, and it is not the same thing as a program that quietly resumes in a matter of months either. It sits in the middle, and according to that same reporting, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency confirmed it was still waiting on a full battle damage assessment, even as those public statements were being made. So you've got 3 different numbers floating around depending on who you ask and when you ask them. Total obliteration from the initial press conference, a setback of only months from the leaked intelligence assessment, and 1 to 2 years from the Pentagon's own later, more measured walkback. According to the Atlantic Council's analysis of this exact dispute, it remains genuinely unclear whether Tehran, anticipating the strike, took deliberate steps to protect its stockpile, either by relocating enriched uranium in advance or by attempting to block access tunnels and ventilation shafts before the bombs hit. Their assessment is blunt about what's actually riding on the answer. The condition of Fordo directly shapes whether Iran ultimately abandons its nuclear ambitions or quietly resumes the pursuit of a weapon once the world's attention drifts elsewhere. I want to be honest with you here, because this is exactly the kind of moment where a lot of coverage just picks the version of the story that fits their narrative and runs with it. I'm not going to do that. All 3 of those claims are sourced, all 3 come from credible reporting chains, and the honest answer, based on everything publicly available right now, is that we do not have full certainty about the internal state of that mountain outside Qom. What we do know for certain is that the strike happened. The scale of it was unprecedented. It was the first combat use of America's largest conventional bomb in history, and it triggered a direct missile exchange on a major American air base that came within 1 intercepted radome of being a genuinely bloody escalation. Now, here's the part of this story that I think most people watching haven't even heard yet, and it's honestly the twist that makes this whole situation far from settled. Because Fordow was not the only mountain. About 1.5 miles south of the Natanz enrichment complex, there is a second underground facility that Iran has been quietly building for years, and Western intelligence didn't even confirm its existence until 2024. It's built into a mountain called Ku e Kolangaz La, and according to JNS reporting, the word Kolang translates roughly to pickaxe, which is where the nickname comes from among analysts and journalists covering the site, Pickax Mountain. And according to that same reporting, IAEA inspectors have never once been allowed inside it. Not once. The facility is believed to be so deep and protected by such dense surrounding rock that some assessments suggest it could actually be harder to destroy from the air than Fordo itself. Let that sink in for a second, because this is the detail nobody's talking about. The mountain the United States already spent 15 years planning to hit, and still may not have fully destroyed according to that disputed assessment, might not even be the hardest target Iran has buried underground. According to satellite analysis compiled by Zero Hedge, the mountain harboring Pickax Mountain's main tunnel complex rises 1,608 meters above sea level, considerably taller than the ridge above Fordo, and the compound sprawls across roughly 1 square kilometer of mountainside inside the Zagros Range. Iran has reportedly built a multi-kilometer security fence and wall system around the entire mountain, tying directly into the existing perimeter around the Natanz complex. According to the Atlantic Council's earlier reporting, citing the Financial Times, while Fordo is understood to have 2 tunnel entrances, Pickax Mountain has at least 4, which makes it significantly harder for any future strike to seal off every access point simultaneously, and its underground halls reportedly cover more total floor space than Fordo's. And here's the update that brings this all the way into the present. According to reporting from Israel Hayom published just last week, satellite imagery from late June showed vehicles and trucks actively moving along the roads leading to and around the facility's western entrances. The Institute for Science and International Security, analyzing that same imagery, said the activity indicated that, quote, work inside the tunnel complex, as well as reinforcement of the tunnel entrance, is continuing. That same report noted the activity appears to violate a memorandum of understanding signed between the United States and Iran on June 17th, an agreement that specifically requires Tehran to maintain the status quo of its nuclear program and bans any construction or reconstruction at nuclear-linked sites. Meanwhile, according to that same reporting, no significant reconstruction has been observed yet at Iran's 3 other main nuclear sites, the ones that were struck and severely damaged during the 12-day war in June of 2025. So think about what that actually tells you. Iran isn't rebuilding Fordo. Iran isn't rebuilding Natanz's damaged halls. But satellite imagery is showing continued active work at the one facility nobody has ever been allowed to inspect, buried in a mountain that may be even harder to destroy than the one Washington already used its largest bomb on. And this isn't a closed chapter of history either. According to Air and Space Forces magazine's reporting from just last month, that same Udeid Air Operations Center, the one damaged in Iran's 2025 retaliation, was, quote, severely damaged by Iran again, this time during the current round of fighting known as Operation Epic Fury. That single detail tells you this entire cycle, strike, retaliation, disputed damage assessment, quiet rebuilding, is not a one-time event from over a year ago. It is a pattern that is actively repeating in real time, right now, while satellite imagery over a second, deeper mountain keeps showing construction vehicles on the move. Here's the strategic picture worth understanding, all the way through. The mountain Iran thought was safe. Fordo got opened up by 14 bunker-busting bombs and a squadron of stealth bombers that flew halfway around the world, using a deliberate diversion tactic to get there undetected. Iran responded within 48 hours by striking the largest American air base in the region, missile for missile, bomb for bomb, in a calculated, telegraphed act of retaliation designed to satisfy domestic politics without triggering a wider war. The regime called the American strike survivable. The White House called it obliterated. The Pentagon later quietly revised that to a setback of 1 to 2 years. And while that argument continued playing out across leaked intelligence assessments and walked-back press statements, Iran appears to have kept working, quietly, inside a second, potentially deeper mountain 1.5 miles away, one that has never had a single outside inspector walk through its doors, and one where satellite images from just weeks ago showed trucks still moving along the access roads. That is not a closed story. That is an open one. And every satellite pass over that ridge near Qom, and every pass over the taller ridge beside Natanz, is effectively another data point in a question that still doesn't have a confirmed answer. Whether the mountain Iran thought was untouchable actually stayed that way, or whether it simply moved its most valuable secrets one valley over before the bombs ever arrived, into a facility that may prove even harder to reach. So here's the honest question worth sitting with. If the facility that was supposedly obliterated may not have been obliterated at all, if the retaliation for hitting it already came within one intercepted radome of a much bigger escalation, and if the facility that's never once been inspected is still showing active construction according to the latest satellite imagery, what does that actually tell you about how close this entire situation still is to reigniting? I'd genuinely like to know what you think happens next with Pickax Mountain, whether it becomes the next Fordo, or whether it stays buried and untouched the way it's clearly designed to. Thanks for sticking with the full breakdown on this one. Stay informed. Stay skeptical of any claim that sounds too clean on either side of this story, and keep watching how this develops. Because based on everything we've just walked through, this mountain story is nowhere near finished.